People often think that the League of Nations was a complete failure. It wasn't actually. It prevented a lot of things. So some of the benefits or the advantages of the League of Nations was that it created the first world court. It was called the Permanent Court of International Justice. So today, the World Court, I guess you could say, is the International Court of Justice. Well, its predecessor was the PCIJ, right? And so this was revolutionary. The idea that you had this world court that would decide cases between different countries. That was a revolutionary idea at the time. What it also did, it also prevented some minor conflicts. So an example would be the German-Polish conflict over Upper Silesia, which was a disputed territory between the two countries. Now, what's so important about this is that a lot of the time, big conflicts will emerge from the minor conflicts, from small things, right? Even World War One and World War Two, right? I read a book which sort of described how people at the time felt about World War One and World War Two, and you would think that people knew that something historical or momentous was happening in the world, that this was a big war. It was only after the fact that people reflected on the war, that they realized just how drastic, just how big an effect it had on human history, right? At the time, or during the early stages of the war, people just thought it was a minor conflict, a minor skirmish that would eventually evaporate, right? Eventually come to a halt. And so that's really important. It was really important for the League of Nations to prevent some of these minor conflicts in case they then began to escalate and become worse. So, you never know. That conflict between Germany and Poland about Upper Silesia could have gotten very, very ugly, and we could have had three world wars instead of two. What the League of Nations also did was develop international law further. Like I said, the Hague Conventions codified a lot of laws. The League of Nations just added to this, and it became a much more studyable subject. Unfortunately, the League of Nations didn't last. There were a number of reasons for this, and you can roughly summarize it into a few, right? So, for example, sanctions. Normally, when states break international law, the best way to punish them is actually not to declare war on them. It's to hit them with sanctions, economic sanctions, political sanctions, military sanctions. And today that's quite an effective remedy. But during 1910 or 1920, the sanctions that the League of Nations would impose were very, very ineffective, right? And the reason they were so ineffective was because there was no central decision-making authority. No one institution within the League of Nations had the power or ability or the respect or the authority to tell nations what to do, or to kind of whip them in line. And so because of this lack of central authority, it couldn't prevent World War II from breaking out. Germany violated the League of Nations. It then went on to withdraw from the League of Nations, and which means it was no longer bound by any international laws and obligations. And so it was able to then become the catalyst really for World War II.